Good day, MBH's main learners. Welcome to our video lesson series on plate tectonics. Today, we are going to learn about the different types of plate boundaries. I am Sir Guetta, your Science 10 teacher. Before we start, let us first equip ourselves with Bible verses that is related to our topic for today. It is from Genesis chapter 7 verse 11. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, the 17th day of the month, the same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened. The Bible stated the formation of tectonic plates through this paragraph. The same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up. This is an evidence that all land masses are once connected that prove the existence of Pangaea. The objective for today's video, which is based on the most essential learning competencies, is for us to describe the different types of plate boundaries. Before we proceed, let us first measure our previous knowledge about the topic. Here is the pre-assessment. Choose the letter of the best answer. Number 1. The plates that moves away from each other. Letter A, convergent plate. Letter B, divergent plate. Letter C, transform plate. And letter D cannot be determined. The answer is divergent plate. Number 2. The plates that moves towards one another. A, convergent plate. B, divergent plate. C, transform plate. D cannot be determined. The answer is convergent plate. Next, number 3. The plates that slide past or grind against each other. Letter A, convergent plate. Letter B, divergent plate. Letter C, transform plate. Letter D cannot be determined. The answer is transform plate. Number 4. What kind of plate boundary occurs between Pacific plate and Philippine plate? A, convergent plate. B, divergent plate. C, transform plate. D cannot be determined. The answer is convergent plate. And last, what kind of plate boundary occurs between Eurasian plate and the North American plate? Letter A, convergent plate. Letter B, divergent plate. Letter C, transform plate. Or letter D cannot be determined. The answer is divergent plate. Last time, we learned about the map of tectonic plates, which gave us very important information such as boundaries between the 7 major tectonic plates, the direction of movements of the plates, the relation of plate boundaries to the position of active volcanoes and volcanic eruption record, and also the relation of earthquakes and plate boundaries. For this video, we will be focusing on the 3 types of plate boundaries and cite some examples of each. There are three types. The first one is the convergent plate boundary. Next is divergent plate boundary. And the last is the transform plate boundary. Convergent plate. The convergent plate boundary are plates that moves towards one another. As it moves toward each other, the plates collides, causing the formation of subduction zone. Subduction zone occurs when an older but denser plate goes underneath the younger and less dense plate during the collision. The examples of these kinds of plate interaction are the Eurasian plate against the Philippine plate, the Philippine plate against the Pacific plate, the North American plate against the Pacific plate, the South American plate against the Nazca plate, and the Eurasian plate against the Indian plate. The next type of plate boundary is divergent plate. Divergent plate boundary are plates that moves away from one another. As the plate moves away from each other, the crust breaks into several segments. The breaking leads to the formation of the down-faulted valleys called rift valleys. It is also associated with the rising of hot materials from the mantle. The rift valley increases its length and depth as the spreading continues. At this point, the valley develops into linear sea. Most divergent boundaries are situated along underwater mountain ranges called oceanic ridges. As the plate separates, new materials from the mantle ooze up to fill the gap. These materials will slowly cool to produce new ocean floor. The examples of divergent plate boundaries are the following. The North American plate against Eurasian plate. The South American plate against the African plate. The Pacific plate against the Nazca plate. The third type of plate boundary is a transform plate boundary. Transform plate boundary are plates that slide or grinds on one another. The plate do not collide nor move away from each other. They move side by side along each other, causing a grinding and sliding motion. The examples are North American plate and the Pacific plate. The most popular transform plate is the San Andreas Fault. It is between Pacific plate and North American plate. This plate is one of the largest fault in the world, running more than 800 miles. The Philippine Fault Zone is a major tectonic feature that transects the whole Philippine archipelago. It is divided into segments and has been the source of large magnitude earthquakes, such as the 1990 Luzon earthquake, along the Digdig segment located at Nueva Vizcaya. Let us summarize all the concepts we learned today. There are three types of plate boundaries. The first one is the convergent plate boundaries, such as the Nazca plate and the South American plate, wherein these plates move towards one another. The second one is divergent plate boundary. such as the Pacific Plate and the Nazca Plate, wherein they move away from one another. The third type is the transform plate boundary, such as the Pacific Plate and the North American Plate, that slide past or grinds against one another. Let us test your learning for today in our post-assessment activity. Choose the letter of the best answer. Number 1. Convergent plate boundary occurs when plate moves blank to each other. A. Towards. B. Away. C. Grinds. D. Cannot be determined. The answer is towards. Number 2. Which is an example of transform plate boundary? Letter A. Eurasian Plate and North American Plate. Letter B. Pacific Plate and North American Plate. Letter C. Australian Plate and Pacific Plate. Letter D. Indian Plate and Eurasian Plate. The correct answer is Pacific Plate and North American Plate. Let us proceed to the third question. What kind of plate boundary is shown in the picture? Letter A. Convergent plate. Letter B. Divergent plate. Letter C. Transform plate. And letter D. Cannot be determined. The answer is divergent plate. Next, what kind of plate boundary occurs between Pacific Plate and Philippine Plate? A. Convergent plate. B. Divergent plate. C. Transform plate. And D. Cannot be determined. The answer is convergent plate. And for our final question, what kind of plate boundary occurs between Eurasian Plate and North American Plate? Letter A. Convergent plate. Letter B. Divergent plate. Letter C. Transform plate. Letter D. Cannot be determined. The answer is divergent plate. Did you get them all correctly? If not, you can repeat the video and try again. But those who get the perfect score, congratulations! Before we end this video lesson, I would like to thank the following website for the picture that I used for this video presentation. Thank you very much. See you again next time for our next video. Good luck and God bless.